Okay, I think we're good. We're on. Today's Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025. And we will call the meeting of the Ad Hoc East Bay Committee to order. We are going to start with a presentation by Mr. Mendez. I think you're all teed up. I think you just go straight through.
All right.
And I'll let you take over from here.
All right. Thanks, Chair. I guess Happy New Year to everybody. First time I've been up here since then. Glad you guys, I bet you're all happy to be back after a meeting last night. So these are the things that I'm going to update you all on. It's a little bit all over the place, but there's a lot of things going on in the East Bank. Feel free to stop me if you want to ask questions along the way, and I'll dive in. First, East Bank Development Authority. At the time y'all passed the legislation last August, the authority really needed 5 things to really come into existence: a board, a CEO, assets, employees, and some money to spend. So far, the board's taken care of, and the mayor is working on the CEO hiring process, and the board met for the first time today, and this meeting was mostly about getting organized. So they made decisions about how to move forward to get themselves some bylaws and get themselves separate legal representation, because they'll have to negotiate with Metro in a few months, and so it would be inappropriate for a law department to represent them in a negotiation with Metro. So they took action today to try to get bylaws and legal representation taken care of at either their next 1 or 2 meetings. For the other things it needs, assets, employees, and operating funds, that should all happen in the form of an intergovernmental agreement that we are hoping to get passed through the East Bank Development Authority and the Metro Council before the budget process starts in earnest in May, with the goal of having the East Bank Development Authority fully operational in the new fiscal year starting at July 1. And we think there's time to do this. And I guess they also decided today that they would meet once a month. And I mean, they were taking care of like just getting going stuff. So they're going to meet once a month. Next meeting will be February 19th of this year, at the same place at Nissan Stadium. So that's where we're at with the East Bank Development Authority. My phone away. Capital spending plan. You guys passed the capital spending plan. Council did in December, I guess it was, and it had 33 million and change for NDOT, for infrastructure and connectivity on the East Bank, and then there was some money for the planning department for the program management. You guys, I think, know that because there hasn't been up until now an authority or a separate department, we've been handling spending as a city through the departments that have contributed to create the East Bank team. So for several years now, any spending has either been in the NDOT part of the capital spending plan or the planning department part of the capital spending plan. And you can see on this slide the breakdown between right-of-way acquisition, design work, and construction. On those forms that get attached to the capital spending plan legislation, we're required to break out these 3 areas: right-of-way, design, and construction. There are a variety of projects, sub-projects, I would say, that are related to this money. Most of it, for now, is in the area of the new football stadium and core infrastructure that we need on the East Bank. For example, it includes some early design work for parking structure that we'll need that's contemplated in the stadium construction deal. Metro needs to participate in the construction of South 2nd Street, which is on the downtown side of the new stadium. That's in there. There's design work early design work for the park that will be between the stadium and the river. In addition to that, there's money in here for designing stormwater requirements for the new construction. And then a big chunk of the money, you can see here, the $14.6 million for right-of-way acquisition is to be able to make the East Bank Boulevard, which will ultimately connect from Korean Veterans up to the far north end of the campus near where Oracle will be. A big chunk of this money that got approved in the last CSP in December is for that right-of-way acquisition. I probably shouldn't have called this stadium infrastructure. I want to talk about infrastructure generally. We've had two presentations. It should say infrastructure. Several things I want to point out here, and maybe not in order on the slide. First, the East Bank has had, since the Cooper administration, some $700 million worth of projects in the capital improvement budget for the East Bank. And so that's now a couple-year-old number. I can tell you that while we don't have a specific number, we will end up asking for more to be in the capital improvement budget. You all know that capital improvement budget is sort of the staging area for expenses. It's not an actual expense till it goes into the CSP. But because 700 million or higher is eye-popping, we put the chart up here as just a reminder that just because that's what the total cost isn't going to be, it doesn't mean that's what Metro's cost is going to be. On the stadium deal, there was a whole bunch of things. And by the way, this table is out of the Fallon. It's an exhibit from the Fallon deal that you guys approved last April. Nothing new, literally just straight out of that deal. And we grabbed that just to show that there's a whole lot of infrastructure listed here, and Metro's going to pay out of pocket for half of one of the items. Similarly, I'm sure you remember from the infrastructure related to the 30 acres Fallon is going to develop, there might be approximately $100 million worth of infrastructure around that, and Metro signed up for under 10% of it. And so the goal is, as the East Bank gets built out over many, many years, to take what the total price tag is for the infrastructure and get as much as possible to be paid for by development partners along the way. And so I know when I was in the council, I was very curious about what the total infrastructure price tag is. I'm sure you guys are. The two takeaways are the total amount of infrastructure from one end of the East Bank to the other will certainly be higher than what's in the capital improvements budget now. But the second takeaway is we will continue to fight as deals come to make sure that as much possible is being borne by parties other than Metro as it gets built out on the East Bank. Shifting gears maybe a lot, talking a little bit about pedestrian and bicycle circulation on the East Bank. This is an image that I don't think has been out in the wild before, and this is generated by Fallon, our development partner, when they've started to show us as they get further along in their planning how we would expect bicycles and pedestrians to circulate on the East Bank. And everybody who's walked or ridden a bike over there for any reason knows there's currently one way around. You cross the pedestrian bridge and you go down a steep decline that frankly is not ADA compliant. We've got the elevator there for ADA compliance. And especially if you walk back to the downtown side of the river or bike back, that incline is not very user-friendly for anybody. The goal in the future is to have lots of choices, like a standard, like if you were walking from here to the convention center, you could take 5 or 6 different routes. You could go down Second, you go down Third, you go down Fourth. The idea here is once it's all built that there's a lot of choices for people either on bike or on foot. One thing, what's that?
Sorry, are we interrupting with questions, or are we?
Sure, anytime you want.
So does the darker green represent bikeways as well? Like there's sort of a lighter green and a darker green?
Yes, the darker green are the planned protected bikeways.
So those are protected bikeways?
And those are at grade. The
Okay.
yellow is intentionality showing how you
Coming
would.
down.
The disconnect is the yellow and the green. There's some work to be done to how those connect.
Okay. And then, okay, but those represent, at least in the current thinking, dedicated bike lanes.
Those indicate there's a disconnect. There needs to be a connect.
Well,
The disconnect between the yellow and the green.
Yeah, but
Because-
the dark green are the planned dedicated grade separated protected bike lanes.
And the one in the upper right of the picture is the East Bank Boulevard.
No, that is Second Street.
Sorry, the one sort of with the arrows running up past the stadium.
Yeah.
That's Second Street.
Second Street.
Okay, so the East Bank Boulevard's, the East Bank Boulevard is the one that doesn't have
Yes.
Correct.
bikeways on it, okay. And then does this mean that the bikeway would not extend to the end of the pedestrian bridge?
First of all, why don't you guys introduce yourself for
Sorry.
folks on camera?
We're just yelling from the back. Apologies. Anna Greider, Metro Planning, and part of the East Bank team.
Ben York with NDOT and part of the East Bank program team.
And Councilmember, so this is a work in progress. We've given you guys a snapshot in time. Nobody should think of this as the final iteration in any way, shape, or form. Part of the reason that we're not in a good position to answer that question is because we're not sure yet exactly what we do as far as getting off the pedestrian bridge where there's the highlighter color bike icon will drive what's really necessary for the rest of the bridge. I don't think there's no current intention to prohibit bikes or limit bikes on the bridge there, despite the fact that it's not shown in green. I think Fallon and East Bank team can correct me if I've got this wrong. I think Fallon's vision for it is that there are going to be sufficient very attractive other avenues where people choose to not be biking on the bridge.
Just like Bob's discussion about how do you get from here to Bridgestone, well, there's a bunch of different ways. What's not shown here is there's a at-grade connection between KVB and Sigenthaler. Because that doesn't immediately jump off this slide at you, but there's optionality built in all of this. But we're mixing the soup right now.
Thank you. I see the arrow going over KVB, so.
While we're on this subject, if I may, Anna, you said grade separated, so that would be like green paint on the edge of the sidewalk?
The details still to be worked out, but we're looking at like what's the safest way to protect cyclists on streets, and so sometimes that can be just a slightly elevated above the vehicular traffic, and so that's what we would be looking at, would be protecting with whether it's I don't remember the technical term, but protecting it and then slightly elevating it from the vehicle so that it's even more protected.
The
Okay.
intent is the complete streets guide that we had put out previously. The intent is to bring them up to sidewalk level, and then have them buffered between automobiles and the pedestrians, such that they're separated, so that we don't have the commingling that we have in other areas of the city that can sometimes be less than optimal.
Yeah, I've been in cities where, even with like a grade separation, there's like pretty substantial intermingling of pedestrians and bikes. And so I'm not sure what the correct answer is, but I just would want to, I know y'all are thinking about this, but just make sure that we're not kind of mixing, pedestrians and bicycles as much as we're buffering from vehicular traffic also making sure that we're not introducing those conflicts and having sort of just a wide sidewalk with a green paint on the edge, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
I can say from experience, there's nothing that terrifies a tourist more than somebody in a cargo bike barreling through the gulch saying, "Watch out, behind you."
We've got the way the gulch is set up on the how not to do it list. Right?
And so, and when you say like separation, you mean with like actual concrete? Is that in addition to the grade, or?
Potentially.
Yeah,
We're still figuring out cross-section, but yes, they are grade separated as in the 6-inch curb, obviously.
Uh-huh.
And then is there vertical delineation of concrete?
I mean,
We don't know yet. We're still working through whether those are buffered via 3-foot tall planter beds or whether they're just tree wells, how the structure of that looks. We haven't gotten into the weeds on that yet.
If you see examples that you like or have experienced in other cities, like we'd love to see that. We're leaving space in the cross section so that we can do this well, and so we'd love to, you know, if you've got pictures or share examples.
And what is the planned configuration of the boulevard in terms of like vehicular travel lanes? What are you guys targeting there?
So that NDOT will be responsible for building that road. In order to get federal funding, there has to be a NEPA process. Part of that involves having a public meeting. There will be a public meeting probably in February, maybe in March, to publicly show different options for the cross-section of East Bank Boulevard. And before I go any further, I just want to call to people's minds, think of Korean veterans outside the convention center, which I think everybody would experience as maybe very wide or too wide and facilitates too quick. And some of the other wide roads we have, like maybe West End just outside of downtown, I think a lot of people would feel that that's too wide. There's fundamentally a trade-off of if we want East Bank Boulevard to be a transit hub, and we are going to have one of the 3 transit hubs on East Bank Boulevard, so there will be buses on East Bank Boulevard, 100% guaranteed.
Ed, you can bring that chair.
There is fundamentally a trade-off of if we do enough width to have everything, including bike lanes, it's going to feel grossly wide. And if we skinny it down, it's going to have cars, it has to have buses because there's a bus station on the road, then bike lanes may have to go. No decisions have been made. That's the trade-off that will fundamentally be shown at the public meeting, is width to get everything uncomfortably wide, or narrowing it and not getting everything. Part of the reason why we're trying to have bike lanes on every other street up there is to, if we end up collectively making the choice to not have bike lanes on East Bank Boulevard, everybody will be, you'll never be more than a block away from East Bank Boulevard, and you can be on a protected bike lane everywhere else over there. That's the current status of the planning for that.
Okay.
So that little highlighter colored spot at the end of the pedestrian bridge, if we consider this a snapshot in time, the next couple slides, they've been in public at a Parks Board meeting a couple months ago, and they should be viewed as potential future things that would be a solution to get people from 45 feet in the air as they come off the pedestrian bridge down to the riverfront. Right now, there's not a whole lot of reason, unless you're biking to Shelby Park, to want to get down 45 feet in the air. But in the future, people will want to get down from that 45-foot elevation down to what will be called Riverside Drive along the river. So these are possible solutions for getting people off of the pedestrian bridge at a height in the 40-something feet in the air. And I had a contest of how many times we could put the word draft on here, because like this is like draft. Nothing is said at all. I can't underscore that enough. But they convey the idea that if we want to get people off the pedestrian bridge and have an option, instead of walking straight into the neighborhood toward the stadium, they want to go down to river level, then you can't be on what's on the screen, the high side of the bridge, because the bridge still building, a historic building is there, and that leaves one spot, which is on the bottom side on these images of the pedestrian bridge, some form of ramp to get down. And you see, is it the railroad tracks that are?
Yes.
That's the red.
In
Yes.
red.
Yeah.
There's CSX tracks there that you can see. You can probably imagine anything that involves space over railroad tracks is not something we're able to do unilaterally at this time because the railroad tracks still have a customer there. And so there's one option we've contemplated that doesn't touch the railroad tracks, and other options, we'd have to wait till the tracks were gone. Again, conceptual, and to show even more concepts, this is a wide, this might be the one that we think is most comfortable for users. Comfortable means translate into takes up space because less slope, more open. So these are, again, we shared these with the Parks Board a couple months ago. This isn't at the top of anybody's list if we have to solve this tomorrow. And so we're letting it linger at conceptual phase. It could be years before we address it, or depending on if we needed to for, because Fallon was going to develop closer to the river sooner than we think they are, we'd have to accelerate reaching a final conclusion about this.
And some of the magic in this is that it ties directly to planned greenways that would tie Shelby Park all the way to Lock 1 that run along the river and through Davidson. And so that's some of the magic in getting people from this aerial location down to the ground location in that area. It really makes that north-south connection really clean.
Is this piece what TPAC has referenced in their public statement about that was in the.
They have
a few days
referenced
ago?
that.
Is this like an ongoing point of discussion with them?
It's in the discussion. The MOU y'all passed, the non-binding MOU you guys passed last year, called for TPAC to provide a non-dismount from a bike option for bicyclists to get down from the bridge to the river. At the time, we all contemplated that would be on TPAC's parcel, which is not this. I think we've collectively decided it maybe doesn't work on TPAC's parcel, and so they, if you read the MOU, owe us a way down. It's not really going to work on their parcel, so reasonable people could disagree about how to finance it.
Yeah.
But they have referenced that in the public statements I've seen. All right. Fallon Company update. This is, you guys have seen this information. Again, as a reminder, they intend to start closer to the football stadium because that's where there's the fewest infrastructure problems. Frankly, as you get closer to the river, the infrastructure problems become magnified. And again, we talked about this at a previous meeting. The gulch is 60 acres. You're looking at 130 acres. This is 2 gulches. So there's no waving a magic wand and having all the infrastructure in the ground here. You got to start somewhere. The football stadium is where we started. So Fallon will be starting at the top of the screen here, parcels C and G. And as a rough timeline, I asked them, they told me it was okay to share for the first 2 buildings, which would be likely a hotel on parcel C, and the affordable housing building on G. Their best estimate is breaking ground in the second half of '26 for that. That matches with our expectations, thinking roughly 2 years to plan a building, a couple years to build a building. You guys approved the development agreement in April of '24, so that's about 2 years to plan, about 2 years to hopefully build. That's the most precise estimate for any of the other parcels. Other parcels for Fallon will depend on market conditions. As we all know, we're entering funny times, and who knows the way things go. But they're incentivized in the development agreement to go as quickly as possible. I mentioned the intergovernmental agreement. I might have actually worked through all this already, and I'm not sure I have really anything to add compared to what I said before. I guess I can preview the broad strokes of what we expect would be in the intergovernmental agreement. And again, you guys, you might not see a draft for a couple of months, and we're hoping that it gets approved by the East Bank Development Authority in April, and hopefully by the council in May. I'll start at the bottom end of that list. For operating funds, in 10 years, it's easy to figure out how the authority pays its expenses, because there will be rent coming in from multiple high-rise buildings, and they can pay their operating expenses out of that, have a reasonable reserve, and then give the rest of the money back to Metro. In the short term, until there's buildings with rent coming in, the authority doesn't have any way to pay its operating expenses, whether that's employees or rent, or any other operating expenses. And so we're anticipating proposing in the intergovernmental agreement that Metro would cover the operating expenses in the years before there's rent, and that would be in the operating budget. And then after that, the deal would be that money would flow the other way into Metro for the rest of the 99 years once the buildings were built. For employees, the last time Metro set up a new agency was the Convention Center Authority about 10 years ago. And the way that worked then was there were a series of employees that worked on convention stuff who were Metro employees, and they got moved over to being Convention Center Authority employees. And so we're going to basically cut and paste that model to have employees who are Metro employees become East Bank Development Authority employees, and that'll require a contract, and that you guys will have a chance to view. And then for assets, there's two main assets that we are going to propose go from Metro to the East Bank Development Authority. One is the 99-year development agreement with Fallon, and that got drafted in a way to allow assignment, so no further council action will be required other than the intergovernmental agreement. There doesn't have to be an amendment to anything to let that assignment happen. I think importantly, the Metro Council will, in any version of an intergovernmental agreement, will retain the right to approve development agreements on future sets of acres. So we're not going to be proposing that you all outsource that forever to the East Bank Development Authority. So that's one asset, is the rights under the development agreement and the responsibilities. And the other thing is, the authority needs an interest in the land in order to run the, to manage the development agreement. And we're not decided yet whether it will propose to transfer ownership of the land, the Metro-owned land, to the authority, or propose that there's a 99-year lease between Metro and the authority. Either way it goes, we intend to reserve the right for Metro to have a way to undo it, whether it's a sale or a lease, Metro's got to be able to reserve a right to undo it. And we're still working through what that exactly would look like. That's I guess the last piece not listed in the bullet points here is we need to cover some nuts and bolts things like we don't think Metro's not divesting from the East Bank, so like NDOT, for example, is still going to be in charge of manholes and infrastructure on the roads, and NES is still going to own the power infrastructure in the roads. And we need to have something in the intergovernmental agreement that basically lays out the general rules of the roads about how Metro, its departments, and the authority are interacting. It'll need to be flexible enough to last for decades, but it needs to at least generally lay out those issues. So I think that's all I've got. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
So when you talk about assets, 99-year agreement, presumably that would include control of the IDA, like the initial development area. And you talked about land as a separate thing from that, so you're talking about the rest of the Metro-owned land that's not covered under the IDA.
Yeah.
I guess when there's no development agreement or anything kind of governing that land, what is the thinking behind transferring that from Metro to the authority at this point?
Honestly, that's one of the things we need more thought on, because I view it a little bit as, I'm not sure it matters, because if the council is going to have the power to approve future development agreements for future acreages, and Metro's got the right to get the land back, whether it's terminated lease or undo the transfer of the land, I'm not sure it matters, and we haven't really thought through all the way about what we're going to propose with that.
I guess my thinking is if there's like, and I don't know a ton about how this stuff works, but if the authority is looking to leverage ownership or a long-term lease of the land in some way to do like financial things or whatever it is, wouldn't the people underwriting that stuff look at and say, well, Metro can just do a clawback on this, so why would they feel comfortable like allowing them to leverage having that land if there's just this like reversion or clawback on the Metro side?
Yeah, not there yet.
Okay.
Good question.
And-
I'm sorry, one other thing about that. No financing is under the state law and the law that you guys passed. The authority can't do any financing without y'all weighing in on it, council voting on it anyway. There's other things where the land ownership might subtly matter one way or the other. The authority has the power to create a business improvement district. It also has the authority, subject to council approval, to engage in tax increment financing, and there may be transaction-related reasons where we need it one way or the other, and we really haven't quite gotten there yet in figuring it out.
I think there are probably several questions from folks. I am gonna just ask, I think what I'd like to do first is if anybody has TPAC questions, I'm gonna let Vice Chair take over the meeting for just a minute, so those can be asked, because I sit on the foundation board, and so I'm not gonna preside over those questions, and then we can get into other questions after that, if that's okay with everybody.
Works for me.
All right, you just,
Oh.
I mean, if we can switch
It's a lot
chairs if
easier.
you want, but.
Any TPAC related questions?
Are we waiting for you to?
No, she's going to stay in the room. She's just not presiding. The vice chair is now officially presiding over this
I need
meeting.
us to switch seats so
I
that
see.
it's
No,
less
no, I
confusing.
can-
Gavel, can I have a gavel?
I can
You want that
envision
fancy
it.
pen?
There we go. Now I'm presiding.
Hereby preside.
I'm just curious what the status of those discussions are. I've seen some notice of it in the media, and I'm just curious what the status is with the TPAC and where things stand.
Yeah, in the media, you really haven't seen characterizations from the mayor's office of the negotiations, and other than saying negotiations are ongoing, we're not in a position to comment.
Well, I appreciate you continuing to negotiate.
Not being a representative from the mayor's office, and negotiations in general, I mean, it's something of like a signal when parties express feelings about negotiations, and that can mean that, you know, there's a fair negotiation happening that's close to resolution, or it can mean that people are just genuinely frustrated and they're gonna keep being frustrated, I don't know. But that was my read on that. Not asking for comment from the mayor's office on that. TPAC, so I'm just trying to think of anything before we revert to standard chair regarding TPAC here. My main question was because they mentioned in their statement the bridge, and so that initially contemplated that the First Street access or Riverside access would be on the TPAC side, kind of integrated with their campus, and now the thinking kind of from both sides, it sounds like, is that that's not going to probably be the case. It works better on the other side. Is that accurate so far?
I don't believe there's any circumstance where there would be a way to get down from the bridge through TPAC's parcel on a bike to river level.
Okay. And so is and if you don't want to get into the specifics, that's fine, but is it that their position is now that, well, that's on the other side of the bridge, and so we should either not contribute or contribute less than was initially contemplated, or?
I'm really not comfortable.
That's okay.
Like, I don't want to characterize their position.
Fair enough. Let's go.
Yeah, sorry, mine's just logistical then, because since we can't answer much, do you have like a timeline of like when y'all are gonna meet again and where there could be solutions so people are not just left out, you know, where things are, where they see publicly? Like, can you discuss that?
No.
Okay.
Not really.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
Other TPAC questions? All right, turn it back over to
Great.
Chair.
I got my pen back now. Alright, who has questions? I'll just make the list. Alright.
Curious where you are in the CEO search. Are you narrowing it down to finalists, and then you hope to have one picked by a certain date? Can you elaborate more on that process?
Yeah, we're hoping to have it done by end of February, end of March at the latest.
Quick?
We definitely, part of this, we mentioned trying to be actually operational by July 1. We'd like the person to be able to look at the intergovernmental agreement before it's baked. And so we're on a pace to hopefully get it done on that timeline.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sure.
Anything else? Here, we'll just keep going.
I'm okay with it.
Okay, I've got a couple things. So the like looking at cycling and pedestrian access through construction. So you know what we're going to be dealing with the next couple of years, well, next several years. But looking at the immediate term, you know, we kind of shifted the, if you're inbound from the Exxon, from the east side, like you would basically have to get to the Exxon and then you could kind of get over off of KVB Shelby. And now we're having to go to KVB in Second, which is not the end of the world, but you know, we're all riding bicycles on sidewalks and, you know, sharing it with pedestrians and whatnot. Is there anything else in the near term that you see changing about that access? Like, are we expecting like a big change where like we have to, you know, people have to start using Woodland or KVB or something? Like, what are we, timeline, what are we thinking there?
Well, there's a lot there, and I might need some assistance from the actual experts, but I'll hit the broad strokes first. It's our intention to keep the pedestrian bridge open under all circumstances other than like literally hours-long
Yep.
closure. That's our intention. That is one of the ground rules we've set for everybody who's doing development over there. I think and then we start a little farther afield on the East Bank. I think hopefully you've been updated. I think work on Jefferson Street to make that safer for bikes to cross over at that point is going to go forward in 2025. And so that's not for everybody, but for some folks who live up more toward your district, having a safer ingress and egress over the river on bike is a big deal, as you know.
You'd be amazed how many people go a very circuitous route just to be able to use the pedestrian
When
bridge
I've done
and
it,
then circle all the way back up.
I went over on a bike at Jefferson Street once, and once is going to be my lifetime.
Not for the faint of heart.
So that's a big deal. I know several of you have been pretty deeply digging into the spokes on Woodland thing. I think, what's the current best timeline for that?
To be determined. They were awarded a federal grant. They are working through the NEPA process to nail that down and finalize all of that. And then they are developing a schedule for full construction in the near future.
So-
I have a number in my head, but I don't want to quote it and it become gospel. So let me pin that for now.
So that's still years, but I think some of the angst that several people expressed and was shared by the mayor's office, we think that log jam's out and it's moving forward now. And then I would say the biggest thing that we've run into and tried to be reactive to, and the mayor has been personally involved in making sure I and everybody else are adequately focused on the issue, is from week to week on site at the construction project for the Titans now, but as Fallon gets going or TPAC, it's always going to be somebody for years to come. Circumstances on the ground will require doing something to the construction site that has an unintended impact on where pedestrians and bikers can go. And we are trying like heck to socialize with every major construction partner over there that they can't just unilaterally do it. And we are building a culture on our end where the second we hear about it, trying to get it resolved in hours to make sure that access isn't shut down. But I think there will continue to be for at least several years to come. I think it's going to shift around a little bit from time to time. Is that fair?
Fair.
Yeah, and I've got a couple more. I haven't had a chance to talk with you in a while about this stuff, so I've got a lot of questions. The parking structure that you referenced, that sounds like it's going to be one of the earlier things to be built. Is that something that Metro is largely going to be responsible for financing, and that will be, there's not a funding mechanism identified for that yet, is there?
So we're not committed to anything yet. We have got a parking consultant that's helping us figure it out. We are sure that when Fallon starts working on parcel C, and again, these parcels are large, like parcel C is gonna end up having
7 acres. It's 7 acres.
7 acres is parcel C. So it may be 4 buildings on C. And Fallon isn't far enough along to know whether they're gonna have separate parking for every structure or whether their parking is sort of combined underground. We think they'll probably be separate, is what we think, but they're not at a final decision yet. Fallon knows that when they get to the point where they have got a footprint for a garage and know how many spaces are there per deck, that we are interested in having, Metro's interested in a conversation about whether we would ask them to do another deck or two and figure out the price and be able to take care of some of our parking obligations to the Titans in that format. And so Fallon's not there yet. we are trying to use the time between now and when they are there to be able to have an idea of how much parking would Metro want on parcel C if we could wave a magic wand and do whatever we want. And so that analyzing is going on. And then you asked about cost. The 50% sales capture for the 100+ acre area around the football stadium, we can use that money to help finance parking. And so if we decided, oh my gosh, we're building a parking garage in 2026, we would pay out of pocket for that with GO bonds and hopefully figure out a way to reimburse ourselves from future sales tax. If we can push it off into a year after we start collecting sales tax from there, then we have a financing mechanism. And so these several things are a financing, construction, feasibility puzzle that we're tracking, and we aren't to decision-making points yet.
Well, it's positive to hear that we think we can use the sales tax, because I don't remember if we had a final answer on that in the last term. So it's good to hear that that's at least a possibility, and then that you're working with Fallon on where they may be doing some parking already. Last thing I had is kind of less of a question and a suggestion to you and the chair. When we had the Fallon agreement that we were working on, we were pretty intentional, the committee and the administration, about having more touch points along the way than just like, hey, here's an agreement, up or down, or even worse, the authorities already approved it, now you guys have to. I don't anticipate that y'all would take that approach with this, but I thought having those touch points along the way where we could kind of see where we were headed and provide input was really helpful, and I would just hope that we could have something resembling that for the intergovernmental agreement with the authority.
Well, I offered to the chair and to all y'all, when the administration is able to have more visibility about when we think the East Bank Development Authority can deliberate about the intergovernmental agreement, I think it would make sense for y'all to have a meeting about the same time. Like, we're having a meeting today, the same day as the East Bank Development Authority. If they are able to get organized enough with bylaws and council that we're able to present them the terms of an intergovernmental agreement in March, I mean, it would be a good time to have another one of these meetings and give you all the same information, so both groups can be thinking about it at the same time.
Thanks, that's all I have for now. So.
Okay. I feel like I came in late and I'm like trying to catch up. I think a couple questions, like you were talking about, like once everyone starts working together, because we've had an issue like in District 17, there's so much going on at the same time, and it like went kind of just awry. People were just doing whatever they wanted. So I wanted to know, like, are y'all planning to have like a call with all the different partners? Because like if there is a problem you see, you know, getting it fixed within a few hours. But I definitely think like being proactive about it, and then if like people like us on the committee, you know, we can have access or being on that call, you know, I think that was helpful, and we've been able to see a lot of improvements thanks to NDOT and working together on that. But I was just wondering if that was something in the plans whenever you were telling us earlier.
Well, there's a very high level of frequent coordination among the various folks working on the East Bank. I think we've I don't know, I think between the major parties, meaning Titans, Fallon, Oracle, the truck stop, and I know I'm leaving some people out, and their primary contractors and the subcontractors, it's some 40 entities, and then you blend in, you know, a half dozen metro departments. And so one of the core jobs for the East Bank team is to keep those folks rowing in the same direction and deconflict. one, I would say, strong success of that coordination coming out of the East Bank team has been, it's a major concern that the parking situation for the football stadium is going to be different every year for the next several years because of construction. And the way it was this year, it's never been like that before. And we managed to get it where I think the traffic experience around the football stadium was better than it's been in pre-construction years. And we managed to blend in direct access by public transportation for the first time. And that's a result of like very, very detailed and proactive deconfliction of conflicts from the East Bank team. We're doing the same thing about utilities, you couldn't even fathom what's under the ground on the East Bank, and sort of a hodgepodge. And there's dozens and dozens of hours trying to figure out what is infrastructure in the new road grid look like. And so there's a lot of that going on, but we would love, if there's a hint of things that are getting messed up, whether it's pedestrian or bike traffic or an unhappy party, we're always looking for ways to improve how we work that.
Great. And then going back to when we were discussing the layout of the bridge and then debating if we're gonna have to in some ways sacrifice, not have a bike lane if we're gonna do this or that. Will that be, I would say, presented and so that it's a full discussion before a decision is made, or will that just be once the team looks at everything?
So right now there's no bike lanes at all over there.
Okay.
So we're gonna more or less infinitely increase the amount of bike lanes. The only real question of interest is whether there's bike lanes on the East Bank Boulevard or not. And there's gonna be the process that I described before with a meeting for public input about several options. And I think there's 4 options that are gonna be presented, or there's 4 or 5 options will be presented. And some will have bike lanes, some will not. And people will be able to comment on it. And we're proactively working with some of the bike advocacy groups in town to, that meeting's not gonna sneak up on them. They know it's coming.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna express their opinion about it.
And then...
But to answer your question though, at the end of it, we're not putting it up for a vote. We're getting input and then
Yes,
we'll
make a decision.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I think that's what I have for now.
I have a few, but let me sort of unpack and see what has not been answered.
Sure.
I think first to follow up on Mr. Parker's concern, I also would like to have that working group, so I would just ask that you keep us updated, and that way we can have time to provide feedback, because I also would hate for in particular in this case, the authority to approve something or be very close to approving something that we haven't even laid eyes on.
I can promise you all that's not gonna happen.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. And then just sort of going back to the infrastructure money on this, I know that there have been some concerns on council from some members that there's a lot of money in the CSP for infrastructure that they see as sort of being diverted from neighborhoods, and I just want to sort of clarify, I think that is money that we're obligated to spend under the agreement with the Titans in order to improve the area to support the bonds. But if you could just speak to that and correct me if I'm wrong, I appreciate it.
Yeah, some of the money in the capital spending plan that you guys approved in December was a requirement in the deal, like the work on South 2nd Street, specifically obligated to do that. We're obligated to provide parking, and I think it's about just 1 million of the 33 million is doing planning work about parking, and those are the only things that I would say are required. There's a bunch of other things that are actively implicated by redeveloping the East Bank, including work on Interstate Drive, the park between the stadium and the river, handling stormwater, building the boulevard, getting James Robertson Parkway out of the way, the right-of-way acquisition, exit for the boulevard into East Nashville at the north end of it. Those are all things that between the Imagine East Bank plan that's been adopted and we're development both with Oracle and the Titan Stadium, these are all things that like we're going to build a neighborhood, like we're going to have to acquire right-of-way for a road. And so largely, the administration views that like we're executing on Imagine East Bank, we're executing on the Oracle deal, we're executing on the football stadium deal, and that's these things that make it a neighborhood are the things that were in the capital spending plan.
And then on those things, just because I know, some members were here when all this was happening and being decided and some weren't, we sort of know the term of the Fallon deal and the term of the Titans deal, but infrastructure is sort of its own thing in there, and sort of is there some sort of long-term timeline on infrastructure and sort of what we expect our sort of build-out portion to be?
Yeah, I would, I promise I'm answering, even though this might be a little meandering, but I promise I'm answering. If somebody had said in 1999, what's the total infrastructure cost for the Gulch, people might have had a worksheet, a spreadsheet, a plan, an idea, but here we are 25 years later, and there's still some piece of infrastructure going in, and stuff is 4 times as expensive as it was then. So having a hard number of what we're going to do on the East Bank is very challenging. But we're turning a brownfield into a dense urban environment. It's a lot. Like there's already $700 million in the capital improvement budget. It's going to be more than that. And so I would say that a thing that you guys maybe should start anticipating, and we haven't done the analysis on this, so we don't know what the answer is yet, but there's a, with city building on this scale, there's a legitimate question of what is the property tax collection difference between the infrastructure going in quickly versus slowly. If we could snap our fingers and manna from heaven, stick all the infrastructure in the ground right now, the overall property tax collections on the next 20 years might be I'm a lot higher. I don't know. The word that wants to come out of my mouth is double. And the right-of-way acquisition for $14 million in that capital spending plan is a great example. Like if we didn't spend that, there is no East Bank Boulevard between Woodland and Jefferson Street. And right now, what's being built over there is 3-story apartment buildings. So if we leave the road grid the way it is, we get 3-story apartment buildings, stick-built, maybe 4 or 5 stories. If we put in the East Bank Boulevard, which has a cost, people will start building high-rises that are multiples in height. And there's an answer in there somewhere about how much we want to spend, and this is a place where everybody's infrastructure in everybody's neighborhood is important. The water fountain not working in somebody's school is important, but we have to at least be aware that there's a difference in how we're calculating the ROI on a water fountain, which is measured in not dollars but valuable other things, versus putting a road in on the East Bank, which could be measured in dollars. And that's ultimately the council and the mayor get to make the choice about the pace of the investment on the East Bank.
I think if I heard correctly in the meeting earlier today, initially the authority is targeting the third Wednesday for their first couple of meetings, but then they move it. Was that correct? I just wanna make sure.
I wasn't clear whether they decided on that for one
Oh,
meeting
okay.
or 2 meetings.
Okay.
We're definitely doing the third Tuesday of the month in February, and then after that, they haven't decided yet. I think it'll end up saying in their bylaws, so I think it'll be decided for sure at the next meeting.
Okay.
But I don't know what that's gonna end up being.
Okay, does anybody have any questions before we move on to sort of scheduling?
And one last question, just curious, is the stadium progressing on schedule?
By all accounts, it is dead on schedule. I got a thumbs up from somebody from the Titans. Yeah, and I think if you follow Sports Authority meetings, you know it. The Sports Authority has a consultant coming group that is on site every day, and all the information we get from the Titans, all the information we get from the Sports Authority's consultant aligns that it's on track for opening in '27 as scheduled.
Excellent, good news.
It's great.
I've got one more, if I may, Chair. This is mostly because I get this question a lot, and I've been giving some version of the answer of these things are big and they take longer than people initially think. But I get a lot of questions about what's going on with the Oracle campus. Where is that? I went to the Soundcheck Christmas party, and when that Oracle deal was signed, I did not expect to be celebrating Christmas in 2024 on that site still. And I think a lot of people are just curious what's going on with that site, and then also with the planned Gray Street pedestrian connection and Cleveland Street Bridge. If there's anything you can share about those things, it would be helpful for me and the public. If there's no news, I will just keep telling people things take a long time.
Let's see, I'm gonna need the team's help for the last couple parts of that, but for Oracle, we continue to be in touch with Oracle. They are, as far as we can tell, actively working on some of the infrastructure planning that they need to do. They've not committed to a firm timeline that we know of, but they are doing things that indicate they're moving forward on Oracle. And then, if I could ask Mr. York to talk about the Gray Street and Cleveland Street.
Yeah, so we had a TDOT coordination meeting today. They're working through their process. It is an official TDOT process because you have to cross this interstate right of way. It could in no way, shape, form, or fashion be a metro process. And we're working with them. They have officially set up a state project folder. They're kicking the tires on cross sections, working with Metro to fully kind of bake in what was in the vision document. Like we've talked about, we did the robust in public engagement. Now we're moving into implementation status. And so we're working with them on cross-section and kind of building that cross-section in a way that looks and feels and acts like we want it to for all intents and purposes. As far as timing, it's a unfunded project from all parties, and so it's kind of sitting out there we're moving the ball towards kickoff, but we haven't gotten into environmental documents, we haven't gotten into full design. We have conceptual design from all parties kind of in a massageable place that everybody's kind of working towards a quasi, everybody kind of likes it, everybody's kind of like, what do we do next? Nobody wants to say we love it because nobody wants to say we're paying for it. And so
Yeah.
we're working towards that with our partners at TDOT. They've been great partners thus far, but we're still trying to get to who's kind of paying for what and how we get the environmental documents started.
So I can tell people we're at the legwork and figuring funding out.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I've been telling people. So I'll
I mean,
continue to do
that's
that.
an adept kind of, that's how I would describe it as well.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so I think that if they keep that Wednesday date, that would be like around March 19th, so I would just ask the committee, if anybody knows, like, you're gonna be out of town or can't do that date, just please let the council office know, and we can look for other dates around that. I think the week before is spring break, so.
It is for Davidson.
Yeah, for Davidson County. So that would prove a tricky week, but.
You're thinking March for a next
March,
meeting of
yeah.
this body?
And Chair, I've got a thing that's unmovable that will take up that full afternoon.
Okay. Well, then,
So I think I could be available at 5, but I don't know if I could promise 4.
I would say push, well, my suggestion, my thinking would be to push to after, the Wednesday after the Development Authority is met, rather than meet prior to them having met in March. But,
yeah, it just depends, I don't think they have their date yet, so we just have to.
yeah, I think you're right.
We'll get their date in mid-February, and then if you could just keep us updated on
I'll do
timing. But I think like roughly March, because I don't think unless you anticipate that there'll be any developments before that intergovernmental agreement that we'll need to address.
I don't think so.
You are anticipating the NEPA meeting for East Bank Boulevard, February or March?
Last week of February is definitely tentative, target. Hopefully it doesn't slide too much more.
All of the public meeting notice requirements would occur within the next few weeks if that is the date.
That meeting requires a 30-day heads up.
Correct.
So,
And I would just ask,
Okay.
ask you to keep in mind as you're scheduling that, if it does push that spring break date, because I know there are probably a bunch of people who would want to attend who do have children, and
Okay.
that could prove tricky.
Thank you for that.
Would you mind checking with us, not that we would determine the date of that meeting, but so that we could give input on it before you schedule it?
we're not really in control of that. It's a subcontractor NDOT,
Okay.
so we're not fully in control of that date.
Okay.
So I'll be happy to share with you as soon as I know for sure what it's gonna be.
Okay.
But it's gonna be probably when it's gonna be.
Okay. Which subcontractor is it?
AECom.
Well, I'd love to be there.
We'll keep you guys in the loop on
Thank you.
what's going on with that. I'll let the chair know and she can disseminate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all we've got. So, does anybody have anything else? Or would you like to move to adjourn?
I like it here. I'm not moving to it.
Just hanging out.
You can stay.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you. Okay, Margaret, it like went black in the middle.
It might have died. Oh, no, it's not dead.
Still at 6.
Still says inception.
Still at 6.
Because I had to step in for Brenda.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of firsts.
You also had your first presiding over announcement.
That's why I was giving you that look, because this went dark and then that went dark, and I was like,
That's why.
Like you're on stage, right?
And it was like so different because like I've never done it, but then on the bases, and then I was like, oh yeah, it's literally the copy of what you're looking at.
Yeah, we are. And I know that's not good. I don't know what to do.
No, and then I was like, damn. So I felt like
We're trying to win any records.
yeah, I'm just worried because I'm using it for me.
yeah, that's, thank you.
These things are